Welcome to the Score Podcast.
In case you haven't heard, this is an election year. Without a doubt, the presidential election is going to be the biggest story of 2024. And what's the most important bellwether for the winner? Well, as they say, it's the economy, stupid, or so it's commonly believed. I'm Jeff Richardson, and welcome to another episode of the Score Podcast. Apologies to the listeners if that sounded crass, but as some of you know, it's a phrase coined by the Clinton-era political strategist James Carville during a brainstorming session about what messages will resonate most with voters. The point is that many voters will vote with their pocketbooks in mind, so how consumers are handling their debts will be a major focus this year. And we've got that covered. Joining me today is my colleague, Susan Fahy, Executive Vice President and Chief Digital Officer at VantageScore. Our CreditGauge tool is under her management, and when the media needs someone to talk to about the state of consumers and their credit health, she's the go-to expert. Susan, thank you for joining me today on the Score Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
So let's start big picture. How is the credit health of the U.S. consumer in general?
In general, our data shows that consumers are managing their debt obligations fairly well. We're starting to see some increasing signs of stress, particularly in the lower income and lower credit scoring segments, where those consumers have been, really impacted by carrying balances over month to month, high interest rates, rising prices, and then, we're definitely starting to see rising delinquency levels, particularly in that segment.
So kind of a story of the haves and have-nots. Let's talk a little bit about some of the headlines we saw after the holiday season. It feels like ages ago, which I mentioned in the previous podcast, but it really was not. It was only 4 weeks ago. So consumers are spending, the economy grew, those were the headlines, all good stuff. So nothing to worry about, right?
Not really. I mean, consumers definitely did spend over the holiday season. The CreditGauge data shows that balances are just continuing to rise. So while that might be good, a headline for, the economy that consumers continue to spend, the issue with that is that money that they've put on credit cards needs to be repaid. And so as we enter 2024, that's an area that we'll look to. Some people are referring to it as a credit hangover, but the holiday season spending was robust, but you got to pay those debts back. So it's definitely something that we're watching very closely.
So got to peel back the onion a little bit and pay attention to the actual numbers and not just the headlines. In the last CreditGauge report, we highlighted credit card usage and utilization. Speaking of spending, what were some of the highlights and insights around those trends?
Sure. So like I mentioned about holiday spending, consumers definitely added to their credit card balances. We saw balances rise year over year, 8.2%, and the credit utilization is also inching higher. So in December, it was up to 31.7%. which is the highest utilization rate for credit cards that we've seen in nearly 3 years in that product specifically. So consumers are adding to the balances, they're using the credit they have access to, and it's just an area that we are watching very closely, and we continue to monitor on a monthly basis with our CreditGauge tool.
Yeah, of course, utilization is an important part of the calculation of people's credit scores. The higher your utilization, the higher your balances relative to the limit, the more challenging it is for your credit score. High utilization rates can cause scores to decline. We've talked a lot on the podcast about student loans and the resumption of payments. What is your expectation for what will happen once those defaults actually start showing up in the credit file, which of course doesn't occur towards the end of 2024?
With the resumption of the student loan repayment plan that was announced last October, those student loan consumers who are staying on top of their student loans and making those payments will see a positive impact on their credit score when the defaults start to be reported later this year. But those who have not kept up with the repayment plan are going to definitely see a decline in their credit score. So our team has done an in-depth analysis on this. And for those who have kept up to date on their repayments, they can expect to see an increase in their average VantageScore credit score of up to 8 points. And then consumers who have not been repaying their student loans can expect to see a decline in their credit score, and that could be anywhere from 1 to 9 points. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the fourth quarter of this year when that data starts to come into consumer credit files.
It certainly will, and one might expect kind of that national average VantageScore credit score to start to lower when some of those delinquencies start to hit the files. So CreditGauge is not the only tool that is under your purview. What else is new with the VantageScore digital suite of tools?
Thank you. So on our VantageScore.com website, we offer a whole library of digital tools that I encourage people to go and look at and use. If you go to VantageScore.com and click on the digital tools button, you will see 4 of our main digital tools. One of them is Inclusion 360. This enables users to see where consumers are in the U.S. that are creditworthy but have been traditionally ignored by conventional models. It's an interactive heat map of the United States. And you're able to drill in by different geographies and see what the newly lendable population is. So that's been very popular with our stakeholders. We also have RiskRatio. This tool enables users to easily plot the relationship between the scores and the risk that they represent over time. And there's several variables that users can choose from. So things like a product type, days past due categories, performance windows, and we update that data on a quarterly basis. And then we also have MarketGain. Now, MarketGain is a customized report for lenders and fintechs, and it's used to quantify what the potential addressable market could be if they were to implement VantageScore 4.0. It is based on a lender's geographic footprint and the newly lendable population. And then we extract that and report on what the loan dollar amount and number of loans could be if a lender was to implement VantageScore 4. And then lastly is CreditGauge, which we've spent today talking about. That's our flagship digital tool. We update it monthly. It offers data insights into U.S. consumer credit. There's a few things. I mean, we do a press release every month to highlight the key insights. We issue a 5-page report with data and insights. And then we also have interactive dashboards that enable folks to do filtering and the things that they're interested in. Like you can look at it by product. You can go back all the way to January 2020. So it's user-friendly. There's more to come. And we're investing heavily in improving the tools that we have with new technologies that'll come out later this month. And we're constantly looking for new data sources to add to our tools to make them richer and more insightful.
And it deserves mentioning that you can go right to the website and use these tools. You don't have to have a subscription. You don't even have to enter in your credentials. They're self-serve. And whether you're trying to build the case or understand what the upside of using VantageScore is, you've got MarketGain and Inclusion 360. If you're trying to understand the impact on delinquencies and credit scores and kind of the relationship there due to macroeconomic volatility, RiskRatio's got you covered. It's a really impressive suite of tools. Susan, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I believe this is our first three-peat guest, so thank you for being a guest again.
Thank you, Jeff.
As I mentioned, all eyes will be on the U.S. economy this year, and more specifically, how consumers are feeling about their financial health. And we'll check in again with Susan for sure. In the meantime, there are clearly some consumer populations that are really struggling to make their payments on time. This includes the most vulnerable to economic volatility, including younger borrowers and lower income borrowers. To help these consumers, VantageScore offers a deep library of education from how certain actions impact your credit score to deep dives on all loan types, including student loans. Check it all out at www.vantagescore.com/consumers. And to take advantage of all the credit health insights Susan and her team provide to the marketplace, the best way to make sure you don't miss anything is to follow us on LinkedIn or check out the CreditGauge tool yourself at VantageScore.com. I'm Jeff Richardson, and I look forward to our next conversation.
The views and opinions expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of VantageScore Solutions. Visit VantageScore.com to learn more.